just occurring to me that this is a thing where no one will ever believe me ever again if I tell them that I'm a perfectionist, because Hi, hello, I'm Allie, and this is my channel where I talk about what I'm knitting, how it's going, and what it's costing me. So today I was thinking that instead of doing like a typical podcast format, I would talk a bit about making mock-ups for our knits, because this is a thing that I've kind of alluded to in some of my episodes, and I don't feel like this is a thing that I really see people talk about. But in terms of like one of the things of this channel being the cost of knitting, I think that mock-ups are a really great way to not waste money on projects that are going to disappoint you. Like, I think that there are definitely things in knitting that like you're gonna have to figure out the hard way, and like you're gonna have projects sometimes that don't turn out how you thought. But I think that a lot of the time, color does not need to be one of the things that's a problem. So I thought today I would show you all of the projects that I've done mock-ups for, show you what those mock-ups look like, show you how the project turned out, and thoughts that I have based off of that. And I also thought it would be fun to walk through the process that I'm doing right now, try to figure out what I'm doing with this yarn, which, as discussed before, oh, did I just drop that MAT? Oh god, put it down. So this is the Hedgehog Fibres Oh So Fine in the colorway Budgie, and it's gorgeous, but I'm having the hardest time figuring out what to do with it. I've gotten so many fantastic recommendations, and I still am like at sea. So I think that I need to start mocking some things up and see if that can help me come to a conclusion. So I thought I would take you along with me while I do that today. And if you've been here before, you know that I always need a tea. So this is my Sloan Classic Earl Grey in this mug from Base Ceramics. We know I'm a sucker for a mug. This is not new information. And look at it. Look at the handle. Beautiful. This is a little studio based out of Brooklyn, New York. I love it. I definitely let that oversteep while I was setting up to film. I kind of forgot that I had started that. Whoops. So before we really dive in, I'll show you what I'm wearing today. So this is my Laura Dalgaard Intarsia sweater, based off of her Introduction to Intarsia Domestica course. Now, unfortunately, this pattern is not very size inclusive. It has a pretty limited range, which I didn't really realize until after. So I cannot endorse this as an option for everybody, unfortunately, but this is one of the projects that I did a lot of mocking up for. So this is the size extra small from the pattern, and I knit this out of We Are Knitters Petite Wool in the colors Dusty Pink, Cinnamon, and Ochre. And if you're interested in more details on this project, I do talk about it more in my Everything I've Ever Knit video, so you can check that out as well. But this is not the first project that I did mock-ups for. That would be almost my first project, my quilted sweater coat from Alexander Tabel. This is a large cardigan style jacket that is knit flat and then seamed together. And then I believe that in the original pattern, I think that the pockets are knit kind of as part of it while you're doing it, but because I wanted to do these fun color patchy pockets, I just did these afterwards as afterthought pockets. So this is one where mock-ups came in handy to help me try to figure out what I wanted those to look like exactly, and then how I was going to make a chart to do that. Now, much like this sweater, I knit this out of the We Are Knitters Petite Wool, again in the colors Dusty Pink, Cinnamon, and Ochre, and then I used We Are Knitters Ecolana in the color Raw Dark Gray for the base of it. Okay, so when I'm doing these mock-ups, I'm using either Adobe Photoshop or Adobe Illustrator, but I'm doing that because this is software that I have because of my work as a graphic designer. Assuming that you don't have that, there are also alternative options that are open source and are free. So GIMP is the free Photoshop basically, and Inkscape is also very similar to Adobe Illustrator. The difference being that Photoshop is pixel-based and Illustrator is vector-based. And if you don't know what that means, I would probably suggest going with Photoshop or GIMP because it's just going to be more recognizable in the way that it works to most people. But I will also say that like if you feel like, oh god, I'm not a techie person, I could never do this, you don't have to do this with software. I think a lot of the principles that I'm going to be talking about as I'm discussing the mock-up process, you could also achieve with literal paper and pencil crayons. So like a trip to your local office supply store, I mean, that's always fun. And if you spend $5 on pencil crayons, that might save you a lot of money on yarn, and it might be worth it. So something to think about if you feel like this is beyond you. But I would also encourage you that if you feel like it's a little bit outside of your comfort zone, but you're kind of curious to try it, I would encourage you to try it. I will show you kind of the basics of how I'm doing this in hopes that that can help you figure it out. But again, if that's not your thing, absolutely no problem. Pencil and paper are great. Okay, so this is the mock-up that I did for my quilted sweater jacket. So I'll open up the layers here. So the first things that I did were kind of pull in pictures of the balls of yarn from the We Are Knitters website because I knew what I wanted to use. So I had these in here so that I could see what they looked like all together, and I could kind of pull colors from that to build this mock-up. So one of the key things in doing mock-ups is just picking the colors out of the yarn. And if you've seen my Everything I've Ever Knit video, you know that I have like a small regret about this sweater, which is that in retrospect, I feel like the orange should be in the middle because it is noticeably darker than the other two colors. So I feel like it would be better balanced if that darker shade were in the middle. Now we can see when I'm doing my mock-up here, kind of how that happened, because I mean, I would actually argue that this might partly be the fault of We Are Knitters, because I would argue that the cinnamon photo on their website is not as accurate a representation of the color as the other two are. Like, I think that in these photos, I mean, the orange is a little bit darker, but I feel like the others hold their own against it fairly well, in a way that in real life, I feel like the difference is a little more dramatic, but maybe that's just me. But so one of the things that I'm doing in creating these mock-ups is trying to pick out the colors of the yarn. But here's the thing. So like if we go over to the eyedropper tool, which is how we can easily grab colors, if I click here, that's given me like a very dark, like rusty brownie color. If I go here, that is a much brighter orange. So you have to kind of be careful where you're grabbing from to look for a color that feels like it kind of accurately summarizes what this color actually looks like. When you are looking at this picture, what tone are you seeing? And so it's a matter of kind of looking through, moving around your eyedropper until you find a shade where it's like, okay, like I feel like maybe that is like the overall color, you know? And then using that, I'll get these out of the way, I was able to start creating some mock-ups. So to start with this, I just did a Google image search for bubble knit, and I just pasted that in. And then I just used Photoshop to edit the color to kind of resemble the ball that we have here reasonably closely. And like you can also see that this bubble knit, like this is not, we're not being precious about this. Like this can be quick. This does not have to be great. Like there is a line here. We can see exactly where I've copied and pasted this image over and over with the splits in it, and that's fine because we're just looking for an overall impression of what this is gonna look like. So initially, I mocked up a pocket like this. I was like, what if each row was like one of these three colors? And like, again, this is sloppy. This isn't precise. This doesn't have to take a lot of time. So I can look at that and I was able to be like, you know what? That's actually not really the look that I'm going for here. So what if I did it like this? What if I only did two colors on each pocket? And what if that one was these two colors? And what if this one was these two colors? Maybe that would be nice. And this is also, again, where the orange being like darker than I felt like it was going to be came back, because I actually ended up re-knitting one of these pockets, because note that, oops, where'd the other pocket go? Note that these final two pockets are not the same as the mock-up. In the mock-up, we have yellow on each of them, and when I did them as per the mock-up, I was like, oh no, again, the one with the orange on it feels heavier. Now, this is where we really have to question my past logic, because I knit this before I knit this. Why was that lesson not applied to this? What a great question for which I do not have an answer, but learn from me. But from this mock-up, we can already see how time was saved by me not mucking around trying to make this version of the pocket, which I concluded I don't really love. And now to show you kind of the basics of how this is done. So I have my color already selected from the eyedropper tool. I'm going to make sure that I'm on the brush tool. I'm gonna make it nice and big just so we can see easily. And we can see that if I just start drawing, it's gonna be like that. We're gonna lose the bubble knit. But if you go into your layers, I'm gonna create a new layer to work on. And up here is your blend mode. And I'm gonna switch it to, I'm gonna try multiply. So there's some trial and error involved in this. So if I do that, you can see how what it's doing is it's like giving this sort of transparent overlay, but the color that you're putting on over top is darkening it inherently, which is going to work for some colors that you're doing, and in some it's not. So this is again a case where you want to be looking at your image of your yarn, and you want to be thinking about, does this mock-up I'm creating look like that? And if not, maybe we need to change something. So you can see how if I go through these different blend modes, it starts to do different things. And we can see, okay, that one is starting to look more accurate to what that yarn actually looks like. And maybe to compensate, maybe I will just drag it over here so it's a little less saturated. And okay, it's a little light, so let me maybe bring it down and make it a little darker. And you kind of adjust until you start to see a color that looks like the actual yarn. And then you can start mocking things up. You can be like, what if this top section was orange? And then we could be like, what if this section, let's pick a random color. What if it was orange and pink? And you can see how those look together, and you can see it on top of this bubble knit texture. So in a way, it's giving you the ability to swatch things virtually, which of course there's a million reasons that you're still gonna wanna do a swatch to figure out the actual material qualities that are gonna matter for this project, as far as like what your gauge actually is and all of these things. But you do not need to buy yarn to figure out a color palette that you are going to like. You can also see here on my project page the little charts that I ended up making afterward based off of my mock-up. So I honestly don't even remember what website I used. I just searched for like free knitting chart maker and I used that. And these are the 2 little charts that I made. And this was, as you can see, after I concluded that I was going to want to use orange on each of the pockets. So this is updated from the original mock-up that we saw that had yellow on 2 of the pockets instead of orange. But so this is a project where we can really see how the mock-up was helpful, right? I had this other idea that maybe I was going to use all 3 colors on the pockets, and after like 2 minutes of mocking up, I was like, I don't think that's what I want to do, as opposed to spending an hour or 2 hours. I don't know, it's pretty bulky. It didn't take me a huge amount of time to knit a pocket, but potentially quite a while to create a pocket that I did not want to use. And in a world where I was using a different combination of colors, a different quantity of colors, it might have been the difference between needing to buy 2 or 3 different colors of contrast yarn for a project, which can also save you money. So I feel like the more that you can figure out what your colors are going to look like together before you actually are buying them and knitting them together, the better off you're going to be. Okay, so this sweater is the next one that I was doing mock-ups for. And you can see for this one, I kind of did a lot. There's a lot happening. So at this point, I was still looking at the We Are Knitters petite wool. I figured that was probably what I wanted to work out of. So I just took a screenshot of their whole color selection and I pasted that here into Illustrator to work from. And then I was kind of grabbing images of the colors that I was most interested in and pulling those up here, pictures of the entire ball. And then from those, I was pulling out colors and just trying combinations of them. So in this case, I did just like a really quick Illustrator doodle, kind of tracing the sweater from a photo of it. And then because it's built out of these separate blobs, I can very easily click on one and change the color and see what that looks like. So you can see I was kind of trying all sorts of different things. This color combination here, you might recognize from my Squiggle sweater. I was at that point, I think, kind of thinking about that sweater, but wasn't sure if I was going to figure out a way to knit it exactly. So I was like, well, maybe it makes sense to just try to use that color palette for something else that's also kind of squiggly, see if I could satisfy the want to knit that. I also was looking at some monochromatic options down here. And you can see that I was messing around with the color palette that I ended up with quite a bit. But interestingly, none of these mock-ups have orange in the middle. I have pink in the middle, I have yellow in the middle, and I have the reversed version of pink in the middle, just the orange and the yellow are flipped. Nowhere did I try the orange in the middle. And I feel like if I did, maybe I would have known. Let's try it out. So if I just duplicate this, let's zoom in. If I make this orange, and I make this pink, I feel like it really changes things, right? Isn't it interesting to see how just moving around the colors can create a very different impact? And actually now looking at this, I'm like, maybe I wouldn't have liked the orange in the middle. Like this might actually be validating what I ended up doing, because I'm not sure I like how that looks in the middle. And actually, so part of my issue was that I feel like the orange ended up in real life feeling a little bit darker than in my mock-up. So let's try adjusting that to see. So I feel like that's starting to show us more clearly the imbalance that I feel there is in the final one. Like I do feel like looking at this, like, yeah, I do feel like that orange side feels heavy. It just draws a lot more of your eye's attention. But I'm not sure I like it anymore in the middle either. So was there ever a good answer? Maybe this color combo was just doomed. I don't know. But see, this is what we learn from mock-ups. This is why we do it. And so this was really an opportunity to look at all of these different colors that I like and imagine different ways that they could come together without having to buy them and not have to figure that out the hard way. Because I think it can be very hard to try to do all this in your head, right? Like it can be really hard to imagine these things side by side and really get an idea for it, and actually physically drawing them or creating them in some way really helps pull it together. So that's what the mock-ups for this one ended up looking like. And this is what the final sweater ended up looking like. So I do feel overall like the mock-up gave me a pretty good sense of what it was going to look like. Like I feel like this guy up here, that's pretty true to how it ended up looking. I mean, minus the shape, which I think I actually did pull this picture from somebody's project page. And I think you can see from this how much my sweater didn't end up being to gauge. Like it did not end up being oversized in the way that's intended to, because mine absolutely does not like balloon in that way. Like not even a little bit. Okay, the next project that I used mock-ups for was my poppy tank, which if you saw my Everything I've Ever Knit, you know that this one was kind of like an adventure that was sort of pieced together from like half of a pattern after it had been like taken down off Ravelry, because turns out it was like ripping off somebody else's pattern, and I just happened to still have a screenshot of it. But when I initially saw it, I took that screenshot because I wanted to mess around with the colors. So unfortunately for this one, there is not a pattern that I can point you to. I just ended up making my own chart based off of that screenshot that I had taken in a width that, based on my gauge, I thought would fit me, and then I just knit some straps to go on it. So this one was a little bit made up, a little bit improvised, but with much the help of a mock-up. But I can tell you that this one was knit out of Cascade 220 Superwash, worsted weight in the colors Molten Lava, Sugar Coral, and Black. So this is my poppy tank. Now, this version is definitely cleaned up. This is the version that I ultimately turned into a chart. So like, if I add these lines, this is the chart that I knit from. But when I was doing the initial mock-ups, which unfortunately I saved over, it looked very much like this. It just wasn't quite as clean. But to kind of show you how I did it, if I just paste in an image of like a random colorwork sweater, so I just found this off Google Images, I can use Illustrator to do Object, Image, Trace, Make, and then I'm gonna start fiddling with settings. So if I open up my Image Trace settings, I'm going to change it from black and white to color. And I can fiddle with the number of colors that it's going to give me to try to get it as close as I can to what the overall impression of this sweater is. So I can really reduce the color palette. I could take it all the way down to just 3 colors. If I had like a really crisp, perfect image of like a 3-color knit, this could be a really effective way to isolate that. This picture has enough like shadows going on that there's no way that it's only going to pull the exact colors of the sweater. But if I kind of adjust it until it starts resembling what I'm looking for, I can then expand it. And now all of these are editable. So I can be like, I want to select everything that's that color. And then I can be like, make it hot pink. And now this color brown that's right beside the pink, this was really just a lighter version of that same color. So I'm going to select all of this color. I'm going to make it pink. And maybe for realism, I'll make it a little bit, oops, I think it was actually lighter. I'll make it a little bit lighter. And if we zoom out, you can see that we're starting to get an impression of what this would look like, right? And what if I was like, okay, well, maybe I want to make the base color really different. So I'll grab the one of the lighter shades of it, and I'll be like, well, what if we made it like, what if we made it really bright yellow? And then just kind of adjust the other tones of it. So select all of that one. That was a slightly darker one. So, okay, we'll make it like that. This was like a much darker version of it, but I think it's just still kind of in the shadows. So I'll select all of that and I'll make it a darker version of this, give us a little bit of realism. And so like you can see that I'm having to kind of tweak several different shades of this color. But depending on how much of an accurate visual you feel like you need, like I feel like we've gotten quite a bit of information right there about what this might look like if you knit it in pink and yellow. And if you want a really, really accurate image, you can keep doing this. You can keep going in and be like, okay, I'm also gonna grab this one and I'm gonna do select same color for all of that. And I'm gonna make it the yellow. And then I'm gonna grab this color and I'm gonna do select same color and I'm gonna make it that. And the more you do this, the more accurate it starts to be. Like, look, especially when you zoom out. Zooming out is the easiest way to lose sight of the details that make it look not quite realistic, and you really start to get an overall impression. So this is basically what I was doing with the poppy tank top. So I had this screenshot and I had done the image trace. So I can just select one of these blocks. I could say select same color. And what if we made it blue? That's a whole different shirt. That's completely different. I could say, let's select all of this one. Let's do the same color. Let's do turquoise. Whole different shirt. And like, I know that in theory, like I could look at balls of yarn and I could be like, yeah, what if I knit it out of these 2 blues instead? But I feel like there's such a gap between that and looking at this. Like, this gives such a clearer image of what you're gonna get, which is why I love doing this. So that's kind of an overview of the things that I've made so far using mockups, but I also like to use mockups for things that I am just thinking about, things that I am considering knitting. That's exactly what these are helpful for. So here's one that I actually made quite a while ago. So there is an artisan clothing maker called Thread and Sprout who makes these gorgeous nature tops. This is an example of them. She also sells a guide of how to create your own and even design your own in terms of combining the colors and the placement of the elements. So I was thinking that maybe I would buy that guide, but then instead of selling it, maybe I would use that as a base for a knitting project because I really love how this looks. So the first thing that I did was, so I'm again an illustrator, I pulled in a photo of this top, and then I pulled in images of some shades of Cascade 220 that I thought I could work with to create a similar look. And then I created a mock-up. So this is an image of an oversized turtleneck. I believe this is an image from an Ozetta pattern, but I'm not sure which at this point. But you can see how this is very much based off of this. So what I did was essentially just draw these blobs on top of the sweater and set them to colors, again, much like when I was working in Photoshop, pulled from the yarns, and using, in this case, the color blend mode in order to get the colors to look like themselves, look as they do on the ball of yarn, but still show through the texture of the stitches, so you really get the idea of what it's going to look like. And in this case, this is a project where I would have to be creating my own chart if I was going to be making this, and this lets me mess with placement. And now, important to note is that behind all of those layers of color, I first added a layer to make it black and white, because if I also remove that, this is how the picture started. And in terms of mocking up colors, the easiest way to get a more accurate color is to first make sure that the base of the garment that you're mocking up on top of is black and white so that it's not skewing your colors too warm. So in this case, I just made a blob in the shape of the sweater that was black and I set it to color. You can see how if it was normal, it would look like that. Color makes it look black and white. And then on top of that, you can start adding your color blobs. So we could also try other colors. So for instance, if I do that and then set this to color, we can see what it would look like in a more reddish tone. We can see what it would look like in a more pinkish tone, in a more bluish tone. Like, we can really mess around and see how this sweater could look different in different colors. So I haven't actually knit that one yet. Time will tell if I decide to, but right now I feel good because I have a very accurate idea of what that would look like, right? Like, I've been able to take it from the thought of, what if I made a sweater that looked kind of like this shirt, into, and if I did that, this is exactly what it would look like. And do I want to make that? I can evaluate that now with a much better idea of how I would feel about it at the end. Okay, now this brings us to our mission of the day, because this swatch is going to be the death of me because I cannot figure out what to do with it. And I'm gonna see if mockups can help me figure out what to do with it. So first we're gonna look at my Ravelry favorites, because there are a few projects that I've sort of considered using this yarn for. Now, one of them is the Pie Camisole by Nabita Jure. So this is a really cute sort of halter, would we call that a halter, I guess, neckline. And it's mostly stockinette, which I feel like shows off a variegated yarn very nicely. This is one thing that a lot of people recommended when I mentioned trying to figure out what to do with this yarn, is that something like this looks really nice in stockinette, to just kind of let it shine. And so I was looking at some patterns like this one that I thought would work well for that. Now, one of my constraints with this is that I only have one skein of it, and that makes me a bit wary to knit a really high neck top like this, because I'm not confident that I could get the whole piece knit. I think I probably would want to do this as like a full length as opposed to a crop, which means that I don't know that I want to like waste yarn covering up this part of me, which like in a summer garment is not really like my top criteria of things that need to be covered. But I was thinking that a way to alleviate some of that, and one of my other concerns about this yarn, would be to actually knit the ribbing of this pattern in a different color. Because one of my concerns about this is that I love these colors on their own, but turquoise on me is just never my favorite thing. I just don't feel like it's one of the colors that I feel the best in. So I was like, well, what if I knit the edges in black to kind of pick up on the speckles? What if I knit it in some leftover lilac-y yarn to pick up on this from my Barnsley sweater? I have some of that left. That could work. What would that look like? Another option that I considered is the 9 p.m. tank by Tiffany Ty. This one is a really nice stockinette base, that I could for sure use to show off the variegation in this yarn. And it also does have this clearly defined border, which if I wanted to, I could also make that a different color. I could make that the purple or the black if I wanted to have something right next to my skin that wasn't just this. And then the other option that I've been thinking about, which kind of flies in the face of the advice that I've gotten, is the Ripple Bralette by Jessie Made Designs, because it's not stockinette, but there are a lot of project photos of this one in variegated yarns that I think look really beautiful. Like I really love how this example looks. And then if I scroll through the images, there are several, like most of these are not knit in solid colors. Most of them are variegated or tonal, and I think they look amazing. So I kind of want to see if I could mock this one up, but it's going to be more challenging because it's a rib. So to try to get an accurate impression of what this would look like is going to be tricky when all I have is this swatch. So in theory, I could knit up another swatch. I could knit a 2x2 swatch to try to emulate what this pattern would look like. I believe it's a 2x2 rib. So I could do that, but also I don't really want to. I already knit a swatch. I don't want to do another swatch. If I actually decide that I'm knitting this project, then I'll knit a swatch. But when I just want to kind of try it out, I would like to see if I can mock this up without doing that. So this is the first project where I'm mocking up a variegated yarn. And because of that, I can't just like draw a big blob of turquoise and slap it on top of an image of a stockinette knit and get the impression of what it's going to look like, right? Because this isn't just solid turquoise. Like to get an accurate impression, I need to be pulling in all of these little flecks at kind of the ratio and frequency that they actually appear in this yarn. So to try to do that, the first thing that I need is a picture of what this yarn looks like, knit up both in stockinette and in 2x2 rib if I want to mock up both of these things. Now, in theory, I could just take a picture of my swatch for the stockinette one, but you know what? I don't want to do that. I'm going to be lazy. I'm going to go trolling through Ravelry and see what I can find. All right, so I'm on Ravelry. I'm going to go to the search and I'm going to go to yarns. And I'm going to look for Hedgehog fiber. I don't remember if it's spelled the American way or the British way. Here we go, Hedgehog fibers. And I'm going to go to yarns. And I'm going to search for Oh So Fine because that's the one that I've got. And we're going to go to colorways. And we are going to search for, whoops, Budgie. 0 matches. Apparently no one on Ravelry has used this particular yarn in this color. Okay, that's fine because I know that Hedgehog Fibers has this colorway in other yarns. So let's remove that criteria. Let's try Merino Aran. Gonna go, I can't type today. Let's go Budgie. Okay, 17 projects. Okay, we have better odds. I'm feeling good. Okay, what is this one? Is this a 1x1 rib? Or is that, that's stockinette. Okay, interesting. Okay, that might be something we can work with. That one's part of a shawl. That's probably not gonna super help us. What about this one? Okay, that looks like maybe a 1x1 rib. Or maybe a brioche. It's kind of chunky, I don't know. What else have we got? We've got cables. That's not very helpful to us. Let's keep scrolling. What about this one? What do your other pictures look like? Also, I'm sorry to anyone whose projects these are, who imagine you're just watching someone's podcast and they're scrolling through Ravelry and suddenly like your face is on your TV as you're just trying to mind your own business and knit a project. Sorry about that. Why does no one want to have a picture that will help me? Okay, so this one not working for us, but you know what? There are a lot of different Hedgehog fibers. So let's try another. 74 projects. Okay. Our odds are getting better and better. Let's see what we can find. Okay, I'm learning that people like to use this as part of larger projects. Do you have other photos that will be useful to me? Oh, so this, interesting. So this one is actually showing, oh, why are you giving me an error, Ravelry? That's not helpful of you. So on this one, we can see that this person has actually striped it. They've alternated with rows of this gray, which interestingly, like from a distance, it kind of all looks like one variegated thing. It's only when you see it close up that you see the striping. Oh, and we can actually see that they've done a fade. So up here, it looks like every row is budgie, and here it's alternating, and here it's gray. Interesting. And that's what it looks like from a distance. Interesting. Okay, possibilities to consider. Okay, here's a pair of socks, which I really like the contrast toes on that. It really picks up nicely on the little tiny bits of green that are in this yarn. we could potentially work from some of these if we needed to, but I would like to find a picture that has a bit of just larger surface areas to pull from. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Okay, okay, we have ribbing. We have ribbing. Interesting. Okay. It's a, what is that, a 3x1? So it's not quite the same ribbing, but it is giving me an idea of what this yarn looks like in ribbing. Interesting. I'm gonna close that one. Close this, close this. So many tabs. Okay, this one might still be useful. That one I don't think will be helpful. Okay, let's keep scrolling, see what else we can find. And so it's also interesting because you can see in doing this that, you know, with hand-dyed yarns, a particular colorway can look quite different from skein to skein. So some of these are much more purpley than mine. Some of them are much darker than mine. There is a range in how it can turn out. So another factor of this is trying to find one that I can pull from that looks like mine. This is the problem with variegated yarns, is they're very often combined with other things. Ooh, this one has a pretty big block of it in the middle. Is this something I can pull from? Oh, it's garter stitch. Interesting. Okay, that's not going to give me the right idea. This is also garter. Why is it all garter? What's happening? Okay, so after all that scrolling, I think our two best options to pull from are going to be this hat and this glove. I feel like they give me kind of the clearest image of a decent number of stitches. I mean, this is quite a small number of stitches, but I also did not find a lot of examples of ribbing. So we're going to make do with what we can. So first I'm going to pull up this image of the ripple bralette and I'm going to copy it. And we're going to go to Photoshop and create a new document and we're going to paste it in. Now I'm going to create a new layer. And so this shirt is the basis on which we're going to basically be drawing the new yarn color. So I'm going to pop back over here. We're going to go back to our glove and we're going to copy that image and paste it in here. Now, the first step is to kind of try to get the gauge to look similar. So I'm just going to shrink this image until it feels like the size of the stitches is similar. So I feel like that's about right. And then it looks like I actually need to rotate it this way in order for the direction of the stitches to match. So I'm going to use the clone stamp tool, which is going to help pull from this image to draw on top of this image. I'm going to try to pull from where the stitches are going a little bit straighter. There's some curvature, obviously, because this is a pair of gloves. But I can start drawing and I can start to see sort of a rough idea of how this yarn would translate onto this top. And I'm not going to do this super carefully because, again, as we know, when you zoom out, you start to get an overall impression that, like, most of the time is kind of enough. Like, it doesn't really have to be super precise, super exact. I'm going to try to get all the way from the bottom to the top because I feel like that is going to be more important than getting all the way across. We just want to get a sense of how this will look. Oops, starting to pull in some of the table. Let's cover that up. So you can see, even just from that little bit, I mean, obviously this is imperfect and obviously this is far from complete, but you can see how if you kind of like squint and like kind of fuzz your eyes a little, like, is it just me? Like, I feel like you can kind of get an idea of what that's starting to look like. You can kind of start to imagine it. So we can keep going, we can keep coloring in, and again, the ribbing isn't straight because we're pulling from a glove and we kind of have to use our imagination a little. But I do feel like this is more information to go off of than I had before. Like, if we just keep going. Okay, so, I mean, yeah, is it looking a little wild? Yes. Is the ribbing in any way straight ribbing? No. But again, if we zoom out, I feel like we start to get an overall impression. I feel like we start to get an idea of what this would look like. I do feel like I am noticing when I zoom out that my mock-up is looking a bit darker than the photo. So I think that's because to get the straightest parts of the ribbing to copy from, I was kind of pulling from down here, which is more in shadow than there. So I can even try to correct for that a bit if I want. Like, I could select this area and I could be like, image adjustments, brightness, contrast, and I could brighten it up a bit. Like, okay, maybe that looks more like my swatch does, right? And then I can start to see what that would look like as a garment. So like, is this beautiful? No, but I do feel like it has given me some information. I feel like, you know what? Maybe I actually would like this yarn in this pattern. It's not stockinette, but I do feel like it still shows the yarn quite nicely. Like if I kind of am cross-referencing in my brain between that glove image and this, you know, shoddy mock-up, I feel like there is kind of a picture in my head, you know? I feel like I could imagine this being a little tank top. I can see it. So that one was a bit of a tricky mock-up because of the ribbing, but I think we can get an even more accurate mock-up going for this pie camisole. So if I copy this image and we create a new document, let's see what we can do. So the first thing I'm gonna do, I'm going to make this black and white because like I said before, that can help. And so in Photoshop, when you do black and white, it gives you these options. So I'm actually going to crank all these further over this way just to make the base lighter, because that's going to make it easier to drop colors on top of it and have it show up without adding a lot of darkness to those colors. So let's just make it a nice light base. And then I'm gonna add a new layer that we're actually going to work on. So let's zoom in, and again, we're gonna go pull the photo that we're gonna grab from. So in this case, we're going to use this toque that Camilla knits so kindly put on Ravelry so that I could pull from. And we are going to paste that in. Whoa, it's much bigger than the image we had in here to start with. Let's shrink that down. So again, my goal here is to shrink this down to be a similar size stitch to the image that I'm mocking up. So I think that's like close enough to probably give us a bit of an impression of what it would be. I'm going to move this kind of out of the way. And again, we're gonna go into the clone tool, and I'm gonna start doodling. And we can see, I'm going to do this as if I'm doing the ribbing in a separate color. So let's just do some coloring. Doo-doo-doo. So again, is this a precise science? No, it is not. But I do feel like I'm getting an idea of what this would look like, right? I can imagine this top in this yarn. Now, what if, let's start a new layer. What if I want to try black ribbing? I'm gonna lower my opacity a little so that we can actually see what's happening, and then hit multiply for our blend mode. So if I do that and then start drawing over the ribbing, we can get an idea of what it would look like if I did this kind of contrast edging. Again, we're not being very precise here. And now, see, even just from that, I'm feeling like, ooh, that looks a lot harsher than I imagined. It's giving very like almost like athletic vibes, like kind of like it's giving me like tracksuit a little in a way that I don't think that's what I want. I don't think that's it. So let's turn off that layer. Let's try if I were to use my leftover yarn from my Barnsley sweater, if we use this kind of lilac color. Let's see what that would look like. I'm gonna put that again on multiply. We'll see if that works. Okay, that's coming up a little dark, but I can adjust that in a second. So I'm gonna doodle that in, do-do-do-do-do. And then let's see, maybe color. It's a little vibrant hue, that's not enough. Oh, I feel like that's quite accurate to the color. Okay, so now we can see that's a very different look, right? Like let's compare that to that. That's very different. And I feel like this is a lot of information. I mean, we could also consider that, right? Like what if it just had that gray edging? Interesting. That's much softer. Now, would it do as much as far as it being a different tone against my skin? Like, I don't know, I like my Barnsley sweater. I don't feel like it's my absolute best color, but I do really like it. But obviously it's a very different impression than the black would be. But from this, like I'm gathering, I don't know if I actually really like the contrast ribbing. Like, I just don't know if is that the look that I want? Let's do down here just to really commit and see. How do I feel about that? I don't hate that. I mean, what a rave review. I am still a little bit concerned about this pattern, the idea of like how high the neck is and the amount of yarn that would use. Whereas with the ripple bralette, I mean, obviously it's much more open at the neck. It's a smaller garment. I think I would still want to make this a full-size top. And this one is knit bottom up, which made me think this would be a bad candidate for this yarn, because then I won't know how much body I can get away with knitting before I start doing the decreases for the top. But then I realized I just recently, for my no frills cardigan that I'm working on, I had to do a provisional cast on, which was the first time I've had that in a project. And I had heard this talked about. I think I vaguely knew what it was, but not to an extent that it ever like would have occurred to me as a way that I could like solve a problem like this. So if you've never done a provisional cast on, the premise is that you're casting on in a way where, you know, you cast on and then you knit as usual, but your starting stitches are still live. So instead of it being like similar to a bound off edge where like once you've knit past that row, like it's gone, they're not still like working stitches. Instead, they are still live stitches. So you can knit, you know, you cast on and you do your knitting and you go in this direction, but then these ones are still held on a string, and then later you stick your needle back in there and now you can knit down this way, which means I could actually start this ripple bra by skipping the 1x1 ribbing at the very bottom. So don't do that and just start knitting the body, go bottom up as intended. But if I start it with a provisional cast on, I can later, once I've done the entire top and know, okay, whatever yarn I have left over is extra and I can just go as long as I want, I can just knit body length until I start to run out of yarn and then do the ribbing and then bind off. So this project might be a good candidate for that, especially since I'm not convinced by this mock-up. Like, I'm not convinced that I like the different colors. And if I'm not doing the different colors, I don't know that this is a pattern that I want to do, because I think the potential for the contrast ribbing was the aspect of this pattern that really appealed to me. So seeing it like this, I'm like, maybe that's not it. Maybe this is it. Maybe we look at this and we blur our eyes a little and we think maybe that would be cute as a bralette. Maybe that would be cute. Interesting. Let's see if I can do a little bit more of this just to give us a better idea. It's occurring to me that this is a thing where no one will ever believe me ever again if I tell them that I'm a perfectionist, because this is such a disaster. This is so far from perfect. But do we agree that it's showing us something? Is it just me? I mean, I do feel like with the way that these are kind of going this way and that way, like it's almost giving like a basket weave look if we zoom out all the way. So maybe this is one where we don't want to zoom too far out or we start to lose the gist of what we're doing. But I feel like if we're generous, if we're kind to ourselves, it's giving us an idea. It's giving us a loose idea. So is it harder to mock up ribbing than stockinette? I would say yes. However, if I were, you know, not one who hates knitting swatches, and I had just knit a 2x2 rib swatch and taken a nice flat overhead photo of it, I could have done a much better job with this mock-up. So that is something that you could consider doing if you wanted to do this and have your mock-up look better than mine does. So do I 100% know what I'm going to do with this yarn yet? I mean, no, but I feel like that was helpful. Like, I feel like I'm actually now considering the ripple bralette more than I was before, because I really don't think that halter is going to do what I want it to do. And I think that the 9 p.m. tank, it would have a similar effect, right? Like if I did a contrast edging, it would look similar. I think it would still give me kind of like tracksuit vibes. So I think that the answer is no contrast ribbing. It's just going to be this, which does mean that it's not going to be my favorite color on me, which then maybe brings us back to like, was this the best yarn selection for me? But look how beautiful it is. This is the struggle. Now, another option that was suggested to me is the Festival Sweater by Petite Knit. I wonder if we could mock this one up. So let's pop this one into Photoshop. And the first thing I'm going to need to do is select kind of all of the black stitch area. So I'm gonna try to do a select color range and pick up the blacks. I'm gonna kind of click around here in these areas to kind of add the various shades of it. And maybe I'll up the fuzziness. Oh yeah, okay, that's bringing more of it into selection. Okay, we'll try that. What happens if I delete that? Okay, that's pretty accurate. We've got most of it. Okay, so I'm gonna undo that. Now, we have this area selected. I'm gonna start a new layer. We are going to, again, take our trusty hat. Actually, let me go back to Ravelry to recopy that image. We're going to paste it in here. We're going to, again, try to loosely match the size of the stitches. So that's gonna have to get smaller. Okay, I'm gonna bring this down off of the sweater, and then I was silly and I lost my selection, so we're gonna do that again. Okay, now we're going to go back to our clone stamp tool. We're gonna pull from the hat and we're gonna start drawing, and because we have this selection on, it's only going to apply to that selected area and replace the black. So I'm going to keep pulling from the hat, telling it where to start from, and I'm going to go along and color in these little stripy bits. And a lot of the time when I'm doing this, like if it's a more time-consuming method like this one, I don't have to do the whole sweater. Like I can do half of the sweater and really just kind of look at half of it and imagine the other half, right? This doesn't have to be super complete, super thorough, just enough to get a sense of what the finished product would look like with a little bit less imagination than you would have to apply if you were doing none of this. All right, and then I'm gonna hit deselect, and we can kind of see what's happening. We can see how these different colors would start to come through in these kind of small stripes. Now, I might also want to maybe pair this with a different color base yarn, because this is a very like warm cream, and this is not a very warm colored yarn. So back on the layer of the sweater itself, I might want to adjust my hue and saturation a little. So I could go lighter, and again, because this is on a separate layer, it's not adjusting the bluey yarn, it's only adjusting the sweater base. And oh, interesting, like look how that looks on like a more white base. What does it look like if it was, ooh, kind of pinky? What does it look like if it's more, oh, what if it's a light purple? What if it was kind of like icy minty as a base? Interesting, interesting. So I feel like I kind of like it in this like whitish, creamish zone, maybe a little less light. Like I actually quite like the look of something like that. That's very interesting to me. Interesting. I kind of like that. Okay, so do I have a final conclusion of what I'm doing with this? No. But do I have a much better handle of what my options are with it? I think yes. So I'm gonna consider that a win. So I hope that this was helpful in some way. This is not intended to be a tutorial. There are a lot of different variables and like details on how to work in Photoshop and Illustrator, and the best approach would depend a lot on the specific project, the type of yarn, the stitch pattern, as we saw with the difference between the stockinette and the ribbing. So there's a lot of different variables, but I hope this just gives you a sense of what is possible. And again, even if this feels very beyond you, there's absolutely no reason that like with that festival sweater, I couldn't have just used pencil crayons and drawn out like a beige sweater and then doodled some like turquoise lines across it and kind of speckled in some greens and some purples and some blacks in a way that kind of roughly matches the ratios of how they appear in this swatch. Like absolutely could have done that and it would have accomplished a very similar thing. And honestly, in the case of the ribbing top, might have given me a more accurate picture because you could just kind of like draw vertical stripes and like shade half of them in a little more. And I feel like that would give you like a pretty accurate impression of how it would look as ribbing. So I hope this kind of gets some gears turning for you as to ways that you could do a little bit more pre-planning at the beginning of your projects that could save you a lot of disappointment or misguided yarn purchases later. And let me know if you have any questions about this process that I can address in a later video. All right, that's it for today. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to be here next time, please feel free to subscribe. I would love to have you back. And like the video if you found it helpful or just like was entertaining enough to have on in the background while you were knitting, like that's cool too. So I hope to see you next time. Bye.